Hey everyone. Have you ever wondered, like really wondered, how React actually works?
Yeah, it's one of those things you use all the time, but
You don't
don't
always.
always think about what's going on under the hood.
Right, like we build these awesome user interfaces, but
Mhm.
what's the magic behind it all? So today we're going deep, deep down into the React code base itself.
That's right, we are.
We're using episode 1 script, Introduction to the React code base, as our kind of like our map.
Our guide.
Our guide, yeah. It's like we're getting a backstage pass of the React GitHub repository. Super exciting stuff. And luckily, I'm not alone on this adventure.
I'm happy to be here. And I think what's really cool about understanding the inner workings of React is that it can totally change how you think about development.
Oh, totally. Like, it's one thing to use the tools, but knowing how they work, that's next level.
Exactly. It's like, you can drive a car without knowing how the engine works, but once you understand the engine,
Yeah,
it's a whole different ballgame.
you're in control. So where do we even begin with something as massive as the React code base? It's huge.
Well, the React repository on GitHub at Facebook React, it's actually really well organized.
Oh, okay.
You'll see folders like, packages, fixtures, scripts, all kinds of good stuff.
So it's like we've got the core code, some testing areas,
Right.
and then the tools that make it all happen behind the scenes.
Exactly. Each folder has its own special role to play.
So if we were to zoom in on the heart of React, the core, where would we go?
The heart of React. You'll find that within the packages directory, specifically the React and Reactum packages.
Okay, those names sound familiar, of course.
They're essential. Can't build any React application without them.
So it's like two sides of the same coin. One side is all about the internal logic, and the
Uh-huh.
other is how React interacts with the real world.
Got it. So let's start with React. If you go into that package and open up the index.js file, that's like the control center.
Okay, the control center, I like that.
Yeah. It's where developers, you and me, access all the fundamental building blocks of React.
Building blocks, now you're speaking my language.
Right. So you've got things like react.createElement.
Okay.
Remember we talked about virtual DOM elements. This is how you create those elements.
Ah, the foundation of everything visual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's react.component.
Oh, yeah, React.component. That's a big one.
It is. This is how you build those reusable, stateful components, those Lego bricks that make up your UI.
I love the Lego analogy.
It works so well. You have all these basic pieces.
Yeah.
And you can combine them in endless ways to create something awesome.
And React gives you those specialized pieces too, right? Like with the submodules.
Absolutely. Things like React Children, which helps manage components within other components, and React Fragment, which lets you group elements without, adding extra nodes to the DOM.
So much functionality packed into that React package.
Oh, for sure.
So we've got React handling all the behind-the-scenes logic, giving us the building blocks. But what about actually displaying those blocks on the screen, making them real? That's where Reactum comes in, right?
Django. Reactum is like the bridge between React's virtual world and the browser's actual DOM.
It's the translator.
It takes those virtual DOM elements we created with react.createElement and turns them into something the browser can actually display.
That sounds like a huge job.
It is, but Reactum has some powerful tools to handle it.
Like what?
Well, there's reactum.render and reactum.hydrate. These are the functions that mount your components onto the DOM.
So they're telling the browser, hey, this is what you need to show.
Exactly. Now, reactum.hydrate is a bit more specialized.
Oh, how so?
It's used when you have server-side rendered content.
Okay.
So some of the HTML was already generated on the server. Reactum.hydrate takes that HTML and kind of like hydrates it with React's interactivity.
So it's like taking a pre-built structure and then making it interactive.
Exactly. Makes the transition seamless for the user.
Super clever. And I'm guessing Reactum handles other things too, right? Like how users interact with our app.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It handles clicks, hovers, form submissions, all that good stuff.
All those ways we interact with the page.
It translates those actions into events that React can understand.
We've covered a lot already, the structure of the repo.
Yeah.
We've peeked inside React and Reactum and started to see how they work together to like create that React experience we all know.
Like a well-choreographed dance.
It is. But before we jump into more complex stuff like reconciliation and fiber architecture,
Big ones.
we got to talk about the build process. How does all this code actually become something we can use in our projects?
Ah, the build process. That's where it gets really interesting, especially if you're into the technical side of things.
Okay, tell me more.
So we've got this raw source code,
Right.
right? And it needs to be transformed into the nice, polished React library that we all use.
Right. It can't just magically appear in our projects.
Exactly. So this is where tools like Webpack and Babel come in.
Okay, I've heard those names before, but...
They're essential. Webpack is a module bundler. It takes all those separate JavaScript files and bundles them into one streamlined package.
Like taking all the ingredients and making it cake?
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And then you have Babel, which is a code transpiler.
Transpiler.
Yeah, it basically translates code from one form to another. So it takes a modern JavaScript in React and makes sure it works in older browsers.
Ah, so it's like a universal translator for JavaScript.
Exactly. You make sure everyone can enjoy the React party, no matter what browser they're using.
I love that. And what about those scripts we saw earlier in the scripts directory?
Those are like the stage managers of the build process.
Ah.
They handle all the behind-the-scenes tasks, like creating different versions of a library.
Versions.
Yeah. You have a production version, which is optimized for like performance, and a development version, which has extra tools for debugging. They also handle minification, which makes the file size smaller, so it downloads faster.
So it's a whole coordinated effort.
Yeah.
Bundling, transpiling different versions, packaging it all up.
Yep, it's all part of the build process.
It's amazing to think that with a few commands, we can build the entire React library.
That's outright.
From scratch.
It's pretty remarkable. And it makes updating and maintaining React so much easier.
This has been fascinating. We've gone from the big picture of the repo to the inner workings of React and Reactin.
We're getting there.
We've even gotten a glimpse of the build process. Where do we go from here?
Well, now that we have a solid foundation, we can really start digging into some of the core concepts of React. Things like reconciliation, the fiber architecture.
Those sound intense.
They are. But they're the keys to understanding what makes React so powerful.
I'm ready. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll dive into those topics.
Sounds good to me. We'll be back in a flash to tackle reconciliation and the fiber architecture. Stay tuned.
We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. I'm still thinking about those React and Reactim packages.
Oh, yeah. They're packed with so much.
So much complexity. But it's starting to make more sense now. It's like I'm seeing the gears turning.
Exactly. And now we're going to look at some of the bigger gears.
Okay.
Like reconciliation.
Reconciliation. That sounds kind of intimidating.
It's actually all about efficiency. It's React's way of keeping updates smooth and making sure your app doesn't feel slow.
I like the sound of that.
So imagine you have a list of, say, 100 items.
Okay.
And you need to change just one. Would you redraw the whole list?
No way. That would be a ton of work.
Exactly. Reconciliation is all about finding the smallest changes that need to be made.
So it's like being smart about updates.
Right. React compares the old virtual DOM with the new one.
Okay.
And figures out exactly what needs to be updated. No more, no less.
That makes sense, but how does it actually compare those virtual DOM trees? They can be pretty complex, right?
React uses a technique called tree traversal. Imagine you're exploring a family tree.
Okay.
Going from parent to child, then to their children, and so on. React does the same thing with the virtual DOM, checking each node and comparing it to the previous version.
So it's like super thorough, checking every little detail.
Yep. Every element, attribute, piece of text, everything.
Wow.
And when it finds a difference, it marks that part for an update. But here's where it gets even cooler. React uses the fiber architecture to manage those updates.
Okay, fiber architecture. We touched on that before.
It's like a project management system for updates.
Interesting.
Instead of changing the DOM directly, React creates a fiber tree.
Okay.
Which is a lightweight version of the virtual DOM that's optimized for scheduling and performing updates.
So it's like creating a plan of attack for updates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it gives React a lot of control over how those updates happen. It can break them down into smaller chunks, pause and resume work, and even prioritize certain tasks to make sure the UI stays responsive.
So even if there are lots of changes happening, the app still feels smooth.
Exactly. It's like having a construction crew that coordinates every step of a renovation.
Instead of just tearing everything down and starting over.
Exactly. So we've got reconciliation, figuring out what needs to change, and the fiber architecture managing how those changes happen. But there's one more piece to the puzzle. Component life cycles.
Component life cycles. I've heard that term before.
They're basically a set of methods that get called at different stages of a component's life.
Okay.
And they give you, as the developer, hooks to control how your components behave.
Ah, so we can tap into those key moments.
Exactly. For example, there's component dib mount.
Okay.
That gets called right after a component is rendered to the DOM for the first time. It's your chance to fetch data, set up event listeners, or do any other setup tasks.
It's like the grand opening of a store.
Haha, exactly.
Yeah.
You've got the space set up. Now it's time to stock the shelves and get ready for customers.
And what about when a component needs to update? Is there a lifecycle method for that too?
You bet. Component did update. It's called when a component re-renders because of changes to its browser state. You can use it to update the DOM, trigger an animation,
Okay.
or send data back to the server.
So it's like the ongoing maintenance crew.
Exactly. Making sure
Okay.
everything's running smoothly, even as things change.
Mm.
And then there's component will unmount.
Which is?
That's called right before a component is removed from the DOM.
Okay.
It's your chance to clean up any resources the component was using, like timers or event listeners.
Closing time? Make sure everything's turned off and locked up?
Exactly. These lifecycle methods are super useful. They give you so much control over how your components behave.
This is all making a lot more sense now. We started with those building blocks in the React package. Now we're seeing how they're put together and managed with reconciliation, fiber, and life cycles.
It's all connected.
It's amazing how much work goes into making React so powerful and efficient.
Now we're not done yet.
Oh.
There's one more big topic we need to cover. State management. How does React deal with all the data that changes in our apps?
State management, that's a big one.
It is. But first, it's important to remember that React already has built-in ways to manage state within individual components.
Okay.
But as your app gets bigger and more complex, you might need something more powerful.
Right, like a bigger toolbox.
Exactly. And there are a few different ways to do that. One way is to use a state management library like Redux or MobX.
I've heard of those.
They provide a centralized store for your app state, so it's easier to share data between components.
So it's like having a single source of truth for all your data.
Exactly. But for smaller apps, you can also use React's Context API.
Context API.
Yeah, it's a way to share data without passing props down through tons of components.
So it's like a shortcut.
Kinda, yeah. It keeps things cleaner and more efficient. It's great that React has different options for state management, so you can choose the one that fits your project best.
This has been an incredible journey. We've learned so much about how React works, from the file structure to the core concepts.
It's all starting to come together, right?
It is. It's amazing how much thought and engineering goes into making React so powerful and efficient.
And remember, this is just the beginning. There's still so much more to explore in the React codebase.
I'm ready for more. Where should we go next? What other secrets are hiding in this vast codebase?
Wow, this deep dive has been like a serious adventure. We've gone from the high-level structure of the repository all the way to the nitty-gritty details of reconciliation, fiber architecture, component life cycles, even state management.
It's quite a journey, isn't it?
It is. It's amazing how it all comes together to create this React experience we all know and love.
But as you've seen, there's so much more happening under the hood than you might realize.
It's like well, now that you have a good grasp of the fundamentals, you can really go in any direction you want.
So many possibilities.
Right. I mean, maybe you're curious about the rendering process itself. You can dive deeper into how React interacts with the browser's DOM, all those algorithms and optimizations that make updates so efficient.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by how React keeps things running smoothly, even with complex updates happening.
It's pretty impressive, right?
It is. What else?
Well, we touched on the fiber architecture, but that's a whole area you could spend weeks exploring. How React breaks down work into smaller units, how it prioritizes tasks to make sure the UI stays responsive.
It's like a perfectly choreographed dance.
It really is. And the cool thing is, the React code base is always evolving. New features, improvements, bug fixes, it's constantly changing.
So it's like this deep dive has given us not just a snapshot of React, but also the tools and knowledge to keep learning as it grows and changes.
Exactly. This is just the beginning of your exploration.
Well, I feel inspired and ready to dive back in.
That's the spirit. The React code base is a treasure trove of knowledge just waiting to be uncovered.
I can't wait to see what else I can find.
I have no doubt you'll discover amazing things.
This has been an incredible journey. Thank you so much for being our guide through the React codebase.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, the most important thing is to keep learning, keep exploring, and keep building amazing things with React.
To all our listeners out there, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the React codebase as much as we did. Happy coding!